morning, everyone. Thank you all for joining us. My name is Ajay. I'm with Wipro. I lead data and AI practice for Wipro here in Americas. Have been in the data and AI space for 20 years. I have my partner here, Brandon, who's the IT director with Williams. Brandon will introduce himself, and we've got an interesting case study to share with you, but I'd let Brandon introduce himself first, and then we'll dive deeper into the case study.
Sure, thanks, Ajay. So again, Brandon Crowley, I'm the director for IT for Enterprise Services for Williams, and for us, that includes our data science and analytics teams. And so I think we've got an interesting use case here to talk about for NextGen Gas, which our analytics team was instrumental in bringing forward. So commercial takes the credit, as I'm sure most of you guys know, but they couldn't get there without the analytics team.
Thank you, Brandon. And like I was just saying, right, this is an interesting story. Also from a technology standpoint, right, we're bringing in Databricks, also how blockchain is helping in the ecosystem to create the next generation certification platform in the energy industry, right? So this is essentially helping us create a sustainable future and innovate at that edge, right? So that's what we're going to cover here today in our case study. But before we get into that, wanted to quickly introduce who we are, right, as Wipro, right? So we are one of the largest global IT consulting and services company. Got presence in over 66 countries, serving 1,400 clients across the globe. And what really drives us is the purpose, right? So our company essentially, we've got 67% of our equity pledged for charitable causes. So talk about education across the world, health. These are some of the causes that our foundation supports, and 67 cents of every dollar that we make goes to the foundation, right? So that is, I wanted to call that out because we are purpose-driven in that sense, right? And sustainability, again, is a huge purpose that we believe in, right? We were one of the 10 founding members of the Transform to Net Zero commitment, right? So, and you would see why, Wipro is kind of pretty active in this space and helping our clients be sustainable and achieve their net zero goals, right? So some of the case studies before we get into the specifics of this sustainable future and how we are innovating for that. I want to talk about data and AI and how we at Wipro are kind of, creating some of the transformative solutions for our clients, right? So 4 examples here. I'll probably spend a couple of minutes on each, cover these examples real quick. Right from monetizing data, right? So increasingly what we are seeing with generative AI is enterprises are looking to bring more and more data on board so they can drive insights from that data, make the generative AI more meaningful, right? And what I mean by that essentially is third-party data, data from social media platforms. So there's a lot of new data sets that are coming into play within the enterprise. And that is where the opportunity is also there to monetize data for the enterprise. So we're working with a few of our clients who are looking to monetize their data sets, right? So we've created data marketplace using Databricks, right? Delta sharing is a huge capability on Databricks that we are using, and we're using that at Williams as well, which we will talk about. So monetizing data in the ecosystem and driving more value for the enterprise, creating new revenue streams is an important example here, right? And then transforming experiences. We've all kind of seen how the digital world has evolved and the expectations from our consumers have changed, right? So transforming experience, case in point here is wealth management. There is a lot of transition of wealth from a baby boomer generation to the next generation. Expectations around how I interact with my financial advisors have changed, right? So augmenting the financial advisors with capabilities like, Mosaic AI, which is being launched here at Databricks, and capabilities around large language model, right? That has been brought into play to augment a financial advisor, deliver value to their end client, right? So that's another Databricks example on how, we're helping our clients kind of transform end customer experience, right? Reinventing operations, as you would imagine in a manufacturing or any industry where there's a pretty heavy equipment that needs to be monitored. So remote inspection, computer vision, machine data, OT data that can be brought into play to kind of reimagine the entire end-to-end operations, bring in efficiency into that process is something that we do for our clients as well. And lastly, I would say helping our clients be more compliant, right? So risk and compliance, strengthening data governance, data lineage capabilities using Unity Catalog on Databricks. Some of those examples are also pretty common with what we are seeing how our clients leverage the platform, Databricks platform, right? Coming to the topic for today, I mean, as I was saying, Wipro is one of the founding members. We were one of the 10 members who committed to transform to net zero. And we've been on that path for the last few years. We've got 2040 as our goal from a net zero achievement. But not just looking at 2040, but also helping our clients kind of achieve that goal much faster, right? And that is the example today that we're going to talk about. I'll pass on to Brandon to kind of take it from here.
Thanks. So before we go too much further, just to help me kind of get a sense, how many of you are from the oil and gas or oil and gas adjacent? Okay, so a few. Helps me target what I talk about, how detailed I get. How many of you that didn't raise your hand are now wondering, is it too late to go? And if you just, right, okay, so hopefully we don't get that detailed. So I'll talk a little bit about Williams, and then we won't bore you with that, and then we'll get into the details. So Williams, for those of you that don't know, is a natural gas infrastructure company. We are a natural gas midstream company. We provide gas throughout most of the United States. We move about a third of the gas in the country every day, and we are now the 4th largest in natural gas storage. So we operate from Oregon down through Texas and back up through New York. So pretty wide footprint. You can imagine some of the complexities that go along with that as we're trying to figure out how we reduce our carbon emissions and how we work with our customers to do the same thing. So we're actually leading the way in our space. We were the first ones in the midstream industry to come out with and announce an actual carbon emission reduction goal. For us, that was 50% reduction by 2050 or by 2030. We are almost there now. So we're ahead of schedule for that goal. But in addition to that, and you can imagine, he mentioned heavy industry, heavy asset. We are very asset intensive. We have pipes and compressors throughout the country, billions of dollars in infrastructure. When you try to then go decarbonize that, it's not an easy task. So when you put out these emissions goals, now we've got to go figure out how to do it. Well, it costs money. So one of the things we figured out we could do, as Ajay also mentioned, was help monetize that data. And this is where NextGen Gas comes in. So we actually worked with several of our partners. One of them was an upstream company, one is a downstream company, and we figured out how to actually get a certified NextGen Gas product to the market using a third party, so it actually had credibility instead of you guys just taking our word that it was low emission gas. And that's really what we're gonna talk about is the journey to get to that from a data perspective. Commercially, it's a big win for us, but from a data perspective, there were challenges that I don't think we really anticipated going in. Last thing, if you guys want to interrupt me, I'm okay with that. I know what's in the slides, but if there's questions you guys have, I'm happy to chase those whenever. We'll also try to leave some time at the end to cover those. So emissions data in the value chain. So I mentioned we've got stuff all over the world, or all over the country, I shouldn't say world, for us the world, but all over the country. Pulling that kind of data and getting a NextGen Gas requires a lot of different data sources and a lot of different data types. So it's not just how much gas did we move, it's how much gas did we move and along which path did it move and where did it come from. And for those of you that aren't real familiar with the natural gas infrastructure, think about the hamster tunnels you guys have probably seen, right? Where the hamsters are running all over and there's all kinds of different paths they can go, and they're fun to watch when you're in preschool, and they never let you have them again in high school, but you kind of understand what our world looks like, right? We've got to figure out where all the hamsters went, what order they went through, who they belong to when they started in the maze, and who they belong to as they go through the maze. And that's what we're really trying to do with natural gas. So we've got to track now which wells did we get the gas from, which path did it go through, which of our facilities did it touch, how were those facilities operating when it went through those facilities, because we have electric compressors, we have natural gas compressors, we have turbine compressors, we have reciprocating compressors. All of those have different impacts on the emissions. So understanding not only what's in operation, but what condition it was operating in helps us figure out how much emissions we might have been generating. Then we go beyond that and we look at, okay, now we know where all that gas was, but which customer did it belong to? We've got to figure out who that gas is allocated to as it goes through each facility. Then we've got to figure out how much gas did we measure at each place through our entire facility, our entire system. It gets to be very complex with a lot of different data, all of that with different unique identifiers. It makes it very challenging to tie it all together. So here's some examples of the systems that we use. Some of you may be familiar with those. For those of you that aren't, we can talk later, but these are some of the bigger ones. Some of you are probably familiar with OSI Soft Pi, notoriously famous for being somewhat difficult to get data out of, at least from an on-prem system. So working through all of that is kind of where we're going to focus and what we did with that. So here's kind of the data to certification process. This is where the challenge really started and how we started figuring this out. So every data project starts with ingestion, right? How do I get my data from the source to wherever it is I want it, and how do I get it in a format that we can use it? So for us, it was going to all those systems I showed you on the last slide and figuring out how do I go get the data and what data do I need? Because I don't need all of it, but I need pieces of it. And I need the data that I actually need because I'm only looking at certain facilities right now, but I can't tie which flow meters tie to those facilities. I can't figure out which equipment ties to those flow meters because none of it's connected. So when we first did this, we set it up as a POC. We have an on-prem SQL database that we use for integration purposes, and we said, you know what, a lot of that data's in there, we can use it. We'll let the customer connect to that directly through a proprietary in-house inquiry services program with a no data call. It worked fine, except they didn't have all the data that we needed. So then last minute, they call our team, the analytics team, we're like, hey, we need you guys to figure this out for us. So they call us, we go in, and we figure out they need the telemetry data. They need the data out of Pi. Well, the next problem is Context Labs and our engineers have looked at P&IDs, and they've figured out which sensors they want, except that those sensors don't match Pi. So now we got to go figure out which sensors that we actually got to go pull out of Pi to be able to pull in and be able to share with Context Labs, our third party that's going to certify. So once we pull all of that in, now we're storing this in an Azure SQL database because we were last minute and enterprise architecture was driving the ship and said, we know how to work with a SQL database, just stand it up, we'll do this inquiry services thing we've already built, it'll work, it'll be great. So for a POC, it was fine. We got it up, we got it running. Context Labs was getting their data. We had about 30 different sites, not even that many at first. We had probably 15 different sites that we had to go through. And we were already seeing our Azure bills start to go up. An Azure SQL database is not the cheapest way to store data. And so we were doing that over and over again and continuing to push that. So then tying all of that together, Context Labs had to come to us and say, how do we do that? Well, again, they went to the analytics team. Hey, you guys have done this before. Can you help them figure that out? So we go help them figure that out. Then we pulled nomination data in. We already had that in our data lake, but we didn't have a way for them to access the data lake at the time, so we actually loaded it to Power BI data sets and then let them have Power BI. So now this third party is going to an on-prem SQL database, an Azure SQL database, and a Power BI data set to try to pull all this data in, and then we're telling them how to link it all together on the back end on their side. Super efficient. No mistakes. I'm sure it worked exactly like we wanted it to, right? Okay, so then the last piece, and I've kind of hit on it a couple times, is we use this inquiry services, homegrown, designed for small O data queries to hit our enterprise integration hub. And it worked for a while until Context Labs started pulling more data, and they had a query that hit that locked the tables up. And this is a production system where our FlowCal system, that is the cash register for the company, tells us how much gas a customer flowed through every meter in the company, could not write to this integration hub, which meant our commercial systems could not pick it up, which meant they couldn't tell our ERP how to invoice our customers. And we nearly missed closing. Not a fun day. So you can imagine the conversations that start at this point on who allowed this to happen, how was this a good idea, how did we ever get here? This is when we started looking at and partnering with Wipro to figure out how we actually get past this. So what did we do? Source to ingestion, we said, okay, all this enterprise integration hub, it doesn't make sense to keep going there. We can use it for point-to-point integrations, that's fine, it works for that, but we should not be letting third parties come in and lock up what is a production resource that could affect our customers and our business. So our DBAs and our server team and enterprise architecture started talking about, well, let's go buy some more servers, let's do database replication, we'll have a reporting database. It'll probably take us 3 months to get all this stuff done. In the meantime, we'll just worry about the risk. So they start heading down that path. So then we start, and I'm involved in one of these meetings, and I've been to Data and AI Summit last year, and I said, what about Delta Share? And the room goes quiet, nobody has any idea what I'm talking about. I said, we should be able to share this data right off our lake with no cost. They got to bring their own compute, so if they write a really long running query, we don't pay for it. And I think they can do it in 2 days. They didn't believe me, but we did it. And we started with the Pi data. We shared it in 2 days. Then we moved everything else to the lake. We put it all in the share and shared it with Context Labs. They loved it. They no longer had to write a whole bunch of OData queries. They just came in through an API. They pulled their data. It worked exactly like it needed to. And oh, by the way, we did all the connections and handed it to them fully modeled. We did it in 2 days at no cost. So this is really where Wipro helped us figure out how to implement that. We already had some of the data in the data lake, but we'd never done Delta Share. We'd never loaded this much Pi data. So we were loading Pi data for 18 months, and you can imagine coming off thousands, tens of thousands of sensors at 15-second intervals. You're starting to pull a lot of data over that time period. So landing that in Azure SQL databases to start with is already problematic, but then figuring out how to load that to a lake and get it over to share to a customer, FTP is not going to be your best idea. And so this is where we ended up with our Azure Data Lake. So Delta Share was a big win for us. This is what put Databricks on the map for my CIO. He knew we spent a lot of money with them. He knew we did ETL, but beyond that, all he knew was we spent a lot of money with them. When we did Delta Share, he was like, this is pretty cool. I like this company. So this is really kind of where we ended up. So here's kind of the architecture, and there's nothing here that's rocket science, right? We do ingestion from sources. We have Azure Data Factory because we do live in Azure. IoT and some of these others we're working on now but aren't immediately involved in this use case. And then we've got your typical medallion architecture, right? We bring it into incoming, we do the modeling in silver. If we need to go all the way to gold, we will. We're sharing art right off of this lake through Delta Share to Context Labs. So we're just loading data off our silver layer or off our bronze layer, depending on what we're sharing, into the share, giving them a token. They're coming in and getting the data.
Sure, and Brandon, if I may add here, right, the Unity catalog aspect also played a pretty important role here in terms of the whole architecture, right?
It did.
Bringing in that security and governance around what is being shared and who accesses what, right, was driven through Unity catalog. Also, this is a highly regulated industry, right? I mean, the entire process end to end, right from the wellhead all the way to the final end user of the gas, right, of the energy, is something that is very well-regulated process. So being able to establish an auditability into this platform, being able to show that where the data is coming from and how it is being transformed from one layer to another layer through the use of Unity Catalog and establishing that lineage, I think played an important role, right? So
yeah, lineage was a big one. You can imagine loading data to an Azure SQL database and storing that data and then doing transformations, trying to prove out that the data was not changed through that journey. Was going to require us to build a whole lot of extra additional infrastructure and monitoring and other things to try to prove that out. And then you get to talk to auditors and show them all of that code and get them comfortable with it, which is a very fun conversation. So with Unity Catalog, lineage comes for free, right? We're building it through Unity Catalog. We're tracing all of that lineage. We can just pull it out. We can show it to them. It becomes the record of how all that data transformations happened. So it's been a dramatic improvement on that side as well. The last thing I'll mention probably on this slide is Context Labs. They were somewhat of a startup coming out of MIT. And so we went to them and said, you tell us how to give you the data. And they were like, no, we'll just figure it out. You tell us how you want it. Since then, since we've done Delta Share with them, they've started telling us that they're going to be talking to their other customers about doing it this way because of how easy it is for them to pull the data in. Bill Dolan I saw over there since we did this. I'm actually working with Bill, who's with Databricks, to try to get some of our data providers to share their data through Delta Share. So this has been a really big win and a novel thing for our company. But this is the architecture we use. Again, some of this is a little aspirational. Some of the other things we're working on to help improve this process. So I mentioned that right now we have PNIDs that have tag sensors on them. And sorry for those of you that don't know what PNIDs are, piping and instrumentation diagrams. So those are little lines that go all over the place and little tags on them that tell you sensors are there. And if you don't know how to read it, they don't tell you anything. We're trying to map those to our Pi system that has a whole bunch of tags in it, about 800,000, for every sensor we have in our company. And by the way, those tags aren't the same. And they don't match our PLC tags. And so we're working now to try to figure out how do we at scale read those PNIDs and match them to Pi tags. And so we're using Databricks workloads with AI and ML to read those PNIDs, ingest that, pull the tags out, have some contextual awareness around that, and then map those automatically to those P&I or to the PI tags. Because we're paying engineers to help expedite the front side of this, and they're going through and manually reading P&IDs and mapping to PI today so that we know what to go get. So we've had a lot of learnings through this, but probably the biggest aha moment was being able to sit in a room and say, hey, I've got a tool we've never used, no cost, do it in 2 days, and actually able to prove it out to our CIO. So what was the impact of this? So NextGen Gas overall for us has been a win because we're getting money off of work we were already going to have to do anyway for our decarbonization targets. So we monetized this data. Last year, we pulled in about $6 million in margin, which isn't huge, but it's certainly better than no return for the investment we were going to have to make anyway in our infrastructure to go get this. Okay, and it's growing, right? So we're going to continue to see more money come off of that. It's certainly not break even, but that really wasn't the goal. The goal was how do we get customers to be able to certify that the gas they're getting to meet their emissions targets is getting to where they need so that they have low emission gas that they can buy. Additionally, moving from our Azure SQL database to just data lake storage was about a 40% reduction in cost on what we would have had if we had to platform all of this in an Azure SQL database and then let Context Labs come in. So pretty significant reduction in cost just from the data storage. And then lastly, we are again on our track to meet our emissions goals, and this is part of the process we get there. So I should mention a little bit about the Context Lab certification process in case anybody's interested. It's not just the data we share, it's also the data the well, the upstream customer, the people that actually pull the gas out of the ground share. They tie that together, and then they're also working with satellite companies and airplanes that fly over and monitor emissions to add to what data we share with them. So they're bringing some awareness outside of our systems and sharing that with and building the certifications off of that. So looking ahead, where are we headed? So this is a little bit about how we think about data. So we think about data really in kind of 3 major tranches. One is commercial, where we're really looking at the contract. How do we get more intelligence around the contract and that customer? And how do we hand information to our sales reps or even to our commercial clients to help them interact with us and do business? We've had a lot of luck with this. Some of our transmission commercial Some of the people in our commercial area have done a lot with this, and we've made a lot of money off of the analytics for commercial. Second, we look at business, and now we're really looking at decisions that we make internally and how do we leverage the data that we've got. And lastly, the field, and this has been our biggest struggle because we can't tie our telemetry data well to everything else that we've got. So really, we do well within each of these silos. The challenge has been how do we get across these silos? So we've told data teams for a while now, go clean up your data, go clean up your systems, and they've done it within their system. And now we've got to figure out how to hop system to system so that we can actually tie our entire data estate together. And so we're working hard on that one right now, but that's kind of the next big challenge in front of us. And it will help our NextGen Gas, and it will help our emissions reductions efforts go forward as well, because we'll have a better idea of what's driving those emissions. But then here's kind of the end of our story, I guess. We're committed to a clean energy future. So we do have some upcoming goals here. We're on track for, like I said, a 50% reduction in our baseline emissions by 2030. Still planning to be carbon neutral, at least for our operations, by 2050. What's not on here is we are actually looking at beyond natural gas, where do we play, right? So we're investing in hydrogen, figuring out how do we get hydrogen into our pipes. You'd be amazed how much smaller hydrogen is than methane and how quickly it runs out of pipes. So figuring out how do we manage that through our pipes. It corrodes the pipes, which makes it even more fun. So looking at how do we use our existing infrastructure beyond the lifetime of what natural gas may be. And then beyond that, we're looking at how do we play in other spaces as well. So this is kind of our journey, looking ahead and thinking about this NextGen Gas and bringing a new product to market and talking about some of the data challenges we had to get there.
Thank you, Brendan. In fact, I also wanted to talk about how what Brandon just spoke about, right, in the energy context kind of applies to other industries as well, right? I mean, in my role, I work with financial services, capital markets, right? I mean, trade settlement. There is a lot of exchange of data, and innovation is happening within the ecosystem, right? So you have players, multiple players in the industry that come together, and the value that can be unlocked is exponential, right? Instead of doing it in silos. Just like how here Williams with upstream partners, downstream partners are able to do an end-to-end certification of natural gas, right? So that is a huge innovation opportunity, right? I mean, so financial services is one. Think of retail, right? I mean, we've all kind of understood how, the tracking of a package, right, from the farm to the shelf in the market, right? I mean, tracking that end-to-end, bringing all of the players in the ecosystem together, whether it is the farmer, the manufacturer, the retailer, and the end consumer, or maybe even the restaurants and other establishments that are out there, right? So bringing that end-to-end visibility and innovating in the ecosystem is what this story is all about. And I mean, we're happy to take questions if there are any. Yeah.